I'd like to welcome everyone for the Nashville Bar Association's first Judicial Town Hall meeting. And I'm so happy to have with us today Judge Angelita Blackshear Dalton, who presides over Division 2 in our Davidson County Criminal Court. Judge Dalton first took the bench in 2006 and presided at the time over General Sessions Court. And then in 2017, she was appointed by Governor Haslam to preside over Division 2 of our criminal court. And in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a lot of changes across the state and in our city with our court system. And the NBA is pleased to be able to present this series of town hall meetings with our judges to discuss those changes. This session is being recorded so that our members who are not able to participate in this call are able to access the information later. For anyone who is on the call who has a question for Judge Dalton or an observation, please use the Zoom group chat function, and I'll moderate this town hall and try to incorporate your questions in as we go along. So Judge Dalton, welcome. Thank you for being with us, and I'll just kind of open it up and let you start us out by giving us kind of an overview of how the Tennessee Supreme Court order in light of this pandemic has affected operations in your courtroom.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate. This is such an important opportunity for the lawyers who practice in our courts to get an understanding of what we're doing in light of the Supreme Court's order. So as I think everybody knows, the Supreme Court issued a declaration of a state of emergency for the judicial branch of government for the entire state of Tennessee, and issued an order suspending in-court proceedings. And this order has been in place for, I guess, right around a month. I believe the first order went into place, if I'm not mistaken, but it was extended through the end of this month, through April 30th. And at this point, we don't know where we are in terms of what the next steps are going to be. But in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, all in-court proceedings were suspended with some exceptions. And I'm just going to address the exceptions that impact the operation of the criminal court, because there were some exceptions that can impact circuit and general sessions and chancery courts. But I think my focus will just be on those exceptions that impact the criminal court operation. And so the accepted cases were cases that involve bond-related matters. We can hear bond-related matters. The General Sessions Court, of course, can hear preliminary hearings for incarcerated individuals, plea agreements for incarcerated individuals, and proceedings related to relief from abuse, including but not limited to orders of protection. And so the Supreme Court basically instructed all of the judicial districts to determine the manner in which those accepted in-person court proceedings were to be conducted. And in doing so, we were instructed to make sure that we include some of the mitigation recommendations by the CDC, such as limiting people who are allowed to be inside the courtroom to just the attorneys on any particular case, the parties, witnesses, court staff, and other necessary persons, and do so in a manner so that we could implement those mitigation recommendations by the CDC, such as social distancing and making sure that the courts are cleaned on a regular basis. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Thank you. See, first Zoom fail of the first town hall. What sorts of hearings are you still having in criminal court? How often and how many people are you seeing in your courtrooms while those are going on?
Okay, so we are still having hearings on bail-related issues, any cases that involve bail-related issues, suspended sentence hearings, probation violation, and community corrections violations hearings. We're doing plea agreements for cases that are resolved. If the parties reach an agreement, we will accept the plea agreements. We're able to do arraignments by way of video conferencing. So that's for the most part. I think I've included everything. I think that for the most part is what we are doing in the criminal courts right now. There may be some exceptions beyond those cases, and if so, we are required to get permission from the Supreme Court in order to have hearings on other matters that were not a part of the Supreme Court's order. I think the next phase of your question was how many people we're seeing. You know, the cases, we're not having a lot of cases on the docket because we're only dealing with cases for individuals who are incarcerated. And we're able to try to, docket them in a manner so as not to overcrowd the dockets. We're not allowing anybody inside the courtroom who is not involved in a particular case. So that definitely cuts down on the number of people that we have in the courtroom. I mean, we get that the courtroom is a public place. However, I think under these circumstances, we definitely, in an effort to impose those social distancing recommendations, we're not allowing for spectators or anything such as that nature in the courtroom. I think for a given case, we're seeing no more than 10 people in the courtroom, and that includes the court staff, clerk, court officers, witnesses, no more than 10 people in the courtroom.
And before we got started, you and I were talking about the sort of daily traffic in the AA Birch building before the pandemic and after this all got started. What have you seen in terms of an overall reduction in the number of people going through those courts and halls?
Well, for anybody who practices in the Birch building knows that place can get crowded. I think that our numbers prior to this pandemic and prior to the Supreme Court's order, we were averaging between 1,500, 2,500 people in the building. And that's, the litigants, parties, staff. I mean, that's everybody in the building. Since this Supreme Court order went into place, I think the numbers are probably around 300 to 400 people per day. And again, that includes any witnesses, litigants, staff. That the numbers may not. I don't know that those numbers include the inmates who are brought in through the sheriff's office. I don't know that they were included in those numbers, but that still gives you an idea of the drastic drop in the numbers.
How are lawyers and litigants in your courts arranging to have hearings, and how is that coordination going on between your office and the people involved?
I tell you what, I really tip my hat to the attorneys who have to figure out those innovative ways in order to reach their clients, especially for the inmates who are housed with the sheriff's office and any of the other facilities. The good thing is the sheriff's office has, and I have some notes here on that. I was going to see if I can find them. The sheriff's office has the capability for the attorneys to meet with their clients at their facilities by way of video conferencing, and it's. I guess the attorneys may chime in on this. I can't speak to this because of, they're the ones who are out there, but it is a secured network so that the attorneys can, obviously communicate with their clients in that confidential setting. But the attorneys will just need to reach out to the sheriff's office, depending on the where their client may be housed, so that they can arrange to have that video conference set up so that they can meet with their clients that way. So the way that we're handling cases, and this is so that we can try to keep the numbers down in the Birch building, and also to try to avoid having the inmates transported if it's not necessary. We're asking the attorneys to try to implement that communication with their clients before they get to court. And if they know that their case is ready to proceed with the hearing, if they know that their case is ready for plea, or if they know that their case is ready for some sort of action or resolution, they're to notify the clerk's office The clerk would then make sure that that case is docketed and will add their client to the transport list. Once their client is transported, again, they can go down in the holding area and can talk with their client in the where they have the partition glass, so that they don't have that personal contact with them, so that they can, further whatever discussion is necessary for their case to proceed. It's, again, I tip my hat to the lawyers for the hard work that they're doing to see that that is done. And so far, it seems to be working okay. I'm sure that there are some glitches somewhere in there, but it seems to be working okay so far.
Well, I was going to ask, what is the greatest challenge that you've seen since these new procedures were adopted in your court?
I think when we first started just getting it off the ground, because a lot of people did not know exactly how to implement the communication with their clients in light of this attempt to mitigate the contact. I think that was one of the biggest issues on the onset. I think that we are trying to implement more proceedings by way of video conferencing, trying to work those kinks out, because we have to work with the sheriff's office and then work with the court staff, work with the clerk's office, work with the attorneys to make sure that, the DA's office and the defense attorneys to make sure that we can get those things implemented. And so it's a lot of spokes in the wheel to, make sure that they're in place. I think that those are some things that we're trying to work out. I think probably the biggest concern that I have, and this, again, this is my concern, is the backlog that we're going to see once we're able to get back to going and trying to get our dockets back on a schedule.
Speaking of backlog, we've kind of talked about the different in-person hearings that are still going on in the courts, but what about video conferencing for other hearings and other matters before the court? Is that being done?
Well, so right now we're only focusing on the cases where the inmates, where people are incarcerated. We definitely want to try to integrate some of the other cases back into our schedule in some fashion. Again, we're still trying to work out the details as it relates to video conferencing. And in the event, and again, I don't know how long we're going to be under the Supreme Court's order, the suspension order for in-person hearings. I don't know how long that will be in place, or if it's going to be extended again. I'd imagine that the Supreme Court is probably, I don't want to speak for them, but I'd imagine that they're probably interested just as well as everybody in trying to get those other cases back into the fold of our scheduling. We are in discussion with the various players with regards to video conferencing as an option to get that done. So it's a work in progress. And the good thing is that we have those tools available. We just need to figure out how to use it.
I know right now that there are no in-person jury trials going on at all. You talked about backlog. What do you think are going to be the challenges going forward for scheduling and actually holding jury trials once we are sort of out of the woods?
Well, it's going to take a lot of work on everybody's part. The court, when I say the court, the judges, the clerks, and the attorneys as well. One thing that I've tried to encourage the attorneys for those cases that are kind of set off in the distance, even beyond the suspension order. Look, if those cases can be resolved, let's get those resolved so that we could try to docket these other cases that are lingering. It's going to take a lot of work, and unfortunately, we're gonna probably have a backlog of those jury trials. We'll have a backlog of those cases where defendants are on bond. Sorry, we're going to have a backlog of those cases where the defendants are on bond, but it's going to take some time, It's going to take a lot of patience on everybody's part, including the judges. But I'm confident that we'll get through it and we'll get it done.
What have you been most impressed with in working with attorneys during this time?
Their eagerness to help. The attorneys have been great. The defense bar, as well as the DA's office, and the cooperation among the attorneys, themselves in trying to resolve some of the issues that are before the court. I know that the DA's office and the defense bar, public defender's office, and the private defense bar have been communicating a lot and trying to get as many of these cases resolved as they can. And so I'm very impressed with that, the level of cooperation that I've seen there.
I know that every judicial district operates a little bit differently. How much communication is there between your court and other courts in the state, and also between our Davidson County criminal courts and the Supreme Court?
Okay, so we I have a weekly call with all of the judicial districts, and just kind of getting feedback on what they're doing to see if that's, see if there's something that they're doing that will help us. They'll see if there's something that we're doing that could help them. So that's been great communication among the criminal court and Supreme Court. It's the same. I mean, we're obviously going to adhere to the Supreme Court's order, but they've also been listening to us. They've been listening to some of the things that we're experiencing and trying to help us figure out ways to work around any of those issues.
What other protocols in our criminal courts do lawyers practicing in those courts need to know about that we haven't already discussed?
So I talked about the making sure that there are cases that are going to be resolved. If they know that there's going to be some resolution in the case, whether it's by plea or if they know that the case is going to be ready to proceed with a hearing, to make sure that they notify the clerk, because if we don't have that communication between the attorneys and the clerk about the status of the case, there could be a situation where the client is not transported. We want to try really hard to get these cases resolved if we can, or if we need to have a hearing, we want to get those cases docketed if we can. So we're asking that the communication remain open between and even with the judge's offices. The other thing is, I talked about, so we're doing the arraignments with the inmates by way of video conferencing, but that requires us to be on a very tight schedule with the facilities, because there are multiple facilities that are involved, and we need to make sure that whether their client is at HDC or CDM or wherever their client may be housed, we have to make sure that we're on their schedule. So we ask that the attorneys be timely on arraignment days. Our protocol that we implemented, I think, is available on the clerk's website. I know that the Bar Association sent it out once it was implemented, but the attorneys are more than welcome to contact any of the courts to get a copy of the protocols, because that protocol lists the times of the various arraignments and things of that, and other information that the attorneys will want to know as we progress through this different time.
Yes, and all of the protocols that the Bar Association has emailed out are also on our website at nashvillebar.org.
Yes.
One other interesting thing that came across recently is the use of email filing in the criminal courts. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So now this is something that interestingly has been in the works even prior to this pandemic. I know that the clerk's offices, I know that the circuit court and the criminal court clerk's offices have been working towards implementing the e-filing for a while. I think, there were various things that they were trying to work out. I think that the pandemic just kind of forced everybody's hands, especially with the criminal court clerk's office, and which was a good encouragement to get it done. And I think that it has been helpful for the attorneys. I mean, it's not new, because we all know that it's been happening over in the federal courts for a long time, and I think that it's helpful in getting those pleadings filed timely, and especially now in an effort to help the attorneys avoid that personal contact. So I'm happy to see it. It's something that could potentially, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to speak for the clerk's office, but I could see something that is something that could potentially remain in place.
Yeah, I was going to ask, with all the changes and the new technology that, well, really probably old technology, but we're all kind of new to it. What sorts of things do you think that have been going on in response to the pandemic will we see continue even once we're out of the woods?
You know, that is a very good question. I think that the technology that is available to us and has, like you said, it has been available to us. I think that now that we realize that it can be done, that we could possibly, I could foresee, using it more and more. I'll give you an example. I had a trial last year where, well, it was not a trial; it was a pre-trial motion, and I had a motion hearing where we actually had a witness testify by way of video conferencing. So that is not new. I just think that for whatever reason, it's just something that we have not done on a regular basis. Is it something that's going to continue? I don't know the answer to that. I'd imagine e-filing, because that's something that had been in the works. Well, I can definitely see that being integrated into in a continuous form. But some of the other practices that we've implemented during this time, it's a good question, and a lot of it would require the buy-in by a lot of people. So we'll see how that turns out.
I'm going to take 1 second just to remind everybody that's on this call, if you have any questions that you'd like me to ask Judge Dalton, please submit them through the Zoom group chat. Judge Dalton, during this uncertain time, can you tell us what you're most grateful for?
Wow, that's a good question. I think that I realize, and I'd imagine a lot of people have done so, how much I've taken for granted, and I'm grateful, and even in our day-to-day lives with in our careers and our jobs as lawyers, as judges, I'm grateful that we have the technology that is available to help us move on. I was talking to my husband, and I were talking to our teenage son who's doing classes by way of a Zoom type platform. And, we told him, had this happened when we were in high school, we did not have this technology. And I think a lot of things would have come to a screeching halt. We did not have, when I was in high school, we didn't have the internet even, we didn't have, Zoom or WebEx or any of the other platforms that allow this kind of communication. There was no such thing as e-filing. There was no, there may have been telephone conferences, I don't know, but, I think that I, for one, who will admit that I am not tech savvy at all, have definitely appreciate the technology that is available to help us to continue in our efforts to make sure that we're getting the work, this necessary work done.
And how do we look going forward? I know that the future and what the Supreme Court may do next is a little bit uncertain, but how are you feeling for the next, let's say, next 2 weeks to 2 months?
What I imagine, and again, this is my opinion only, and I can't speak for the other judges, and especially cannot speak for the Supreme Court, but what I imagine, what I envision is that we're going to try to utilize these resources that we have available, that I just spoke of, this technology that we have available to us, to try to integrate some of those, other cases back into our scheduling, so that we can make sure that we're continuing to do the work that needs to be done in our courts, and hoping to slow that backlog of cases that we are experiencing. So that's what I hope. That's what I envision. I would be surprised if I'm alone in that thought process. But again, a lot of that is really going to depend on what the experts are saying in terms of where we are with this virus. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. You know, look, I believe, I know that the Supreme Court did not take its decision lightly at all when it implemented its order and put a lot of thought into it. And I'm certain that the court will continue to put a lot of thought into the next steps as we move forward.
One other thing I'd like to ask you about is that recently the criminal court set remotely by video hearing to hear a petition filed by the public defender and then opposed by the Davidson County district attorney. And I just wanted to kind of ask about that experience of having a hearing and doing it that way.
Well, actually, that was the General Sessions Court that had the hearing remotely. The criminal courts did not. We did not have a hearing. We basically made our decision based upon the pleadings that were filed by the parties, and did so without a hearing. But the General Sessions Court did conduct a hearing, and which I'm certain, and I guess caught a glimpse of that by way of what was reported in the news, and I'm certain I'd be interested in hearing what their thoughts were in that process.
I'll be sure to ask Judge Jones and Judge Robinson at our town hall. I believe it's on Wednesday about that.
Yeah.
You did hear the same petition though, just heard it first. Okay, and you didn't do it by video conference.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. I didn't want to miss an opportunity to ask about that.
Yeah.
What else? Anything else that you'd like to share with the lawyers practicing in your court?
Well, just, you know, again, as I say, I cannot say enough how much I appreciate the hard work that they're doing. I know that what we're experiencing right now is not easy on any of us. It's new, and I think that we were all just really kind of surprised, I guess, is how I will explain it, when we were hit, well, I don't want to use the word, but when we were ordered to discontinue in-person court proceedings, it was something that was very different. And you know, I talked to some of the attorneys who, I have to say this very carefully, but some of the attorneys who've been practicing even a lot longer than I have. And, you know, we're all saying this is something that has never happened in our lifetime, where we've had such an extensive, I guess imposition in the court operation. But, you know, the beauty of it is, as I've said earlier, there is such great level of cooperation among all of the players so that we could get through this and do as best we can to make sure that we're getting this work done. It's not easy. Yes, there are some areas of improvement I'm sure that we could implement, and we're working with those, we're listening. And we definitely want to, you know, do what we can to try to continue through this process as efficiently as possible.
Judge Shelton, thank you again so much for being with us today and sharing your thoughts and your vision for the future during this time. I'll give one last opportunity for any questions, and then we'll bring this town hall to a close.
I can't believe a town hall with attorneys and no questions.
We're speechless for once. Well, thank you again, Judge Dalton, and thank you for everyone who has joined us today. We have town halls set up on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday with Judge Binkley in our Davidson County Circuit Court, with Judges Linda Jones and Gail Robinson in the General Sessions Court, and then on Thursday with Chancellors Martin, Moskell, and Perkins from our Davidson County Chancery Court. So we hope that you will join us for those. And thank you again, Judge Dalton, and we will now end this first town hall.
Thank you so much for inviting me.